Welcome to the 2015 Hermann Otto Hirschfeld lecture. Great pleasure to have you here. The Hermann Otto Hirschfeld lecture has been given in this room since 2003, when we first, in construction that was called CASE, Center for Applied Statistics and Economics, and later the Sonderforschungsbereich, that you see here, the Collaborative Research Center on Economic Risk, has taken over this opportunity to show the variety of scientific proliferations and ramifications into understanding risk and economics jointly. And we have named this lecture after Hermann Otto Hirschfeld. I will come to this lecture, I will come to the details of this lecture in two steps. So first I will present you the work of Hermann Otto Hirschfeld, but even before that, on zero state, I will tell you something about this chapel here. This is actually the oldest, hello, yeah, good, oh, good. Okay, thank you. Thanks for reminding me. This is the oldest, I can say, chapel or church in Berlin. And when you have looked outside, you have seen two things. First of all, what I'm very proud of, the street of this one is called St. Wolfgang. My name is Wolfgang Hertle. I happen to be the director of this Collaborative Research Center. And secondly, you've seen Heilig Geist, which means Holy Ghost. And this was actually a hospital, yeah? And where you see the S-Bahn, yeah? Maybe the younger people don't know because it was about 120 years ago, so you cannot really know. The S-Bahn actually runs on the old wall of Berlin. That's why the other side of the S-Bahn is called Spandauer Vorstadt, sort of it's more the outside Berlin. So this was the end of Berlin, and sick people you would like to put at the outside of Berlin, so just about before the wall ended was this hospital, and this church was part of this hospital. In 1904, this building was done for the Management Science School, and not only Hermann Otto Hirschfeld working here at this university, also myself, I'm connected with that because the chair, which I do teaching statistics, is called Ladislav von Bortkiewicz Chair of Statistics. He was working in this very building for 30 years. He's my predecessor from 1901 to 1931. So that's about the church. Now let me come to Hermann Otto Hirschfeld and why he is important for us. Hermann Otto Hirschfeld was a Berlin, actually in Spandau, outside the wall, born mathematician. And in 1912, he was born, and in the 30s, he made his PhD in mathematics, actually, or in statistics. And you will see later that his name, as he named himself, is actually connected to today's talk, or today's speaker, because he named himself after he studied first in Göttingen, mathematics, physics, and philosophy. This is what you see here is his PhD application to be allowed to make a PhD in the field of mathematics, but as I said, it was actually statistics and philosophy. And very famous names you can see here on the PhD protocol. Maybe you recognize names like Gumbel or other famous mathematicians. But before we come to the CV of our today's speaker, let me tell you what happened to him and where the connection lies to Key's heart. Hermann Otto Hirschfeld was born in April 1912, and he had to leave for the reasons we all know. In 1934, actually he left with a grant from, I think at that time, maybe it was still called Kaiser Wilhelm grant, but he was leaving with a grant. And then in 1934, when he was at Great Britain, he didn't decide to come back for obvious reason, and he renamed himself as Hartley. And Hart is, as I have read in the history of his life, I have heard that Hart is an Old English name for Hirsch and Ley for Feld. So Hirschfeld, Hartley, and today we have Keith Hart. And one episode I would like to mention, at that time when he gave talks later in the 50s in the United States, then people went up to him and said, "Now, sorry, you are copying results here. This was all done by H.O. Hirschfeld." He said, "No, that's me, right? That's H.O. Hartley." Anyway, he had made a second PhD, and he is the founder of the Iowa State College. He was founding the Department of Statistics there, later at Texas A&M. And we have received from his daughter the rights to not only name this lecture, but also we have a junior professorship on high-dimensional statistics named after Hermann Otto Hirschfeld. So now it is the time to ask Rolf Schieder, the organizer, the co-organizer of today's conference, to tell a little bit about Keith Hart's achievements and his life, and then we will give you the documents that really make you important. Let's welcome Rolf.
Thank you very much.
Maybe you should also get that one.
Wolfgang Hertle, the theological faculty, and I am very happy that the economics faculty and the theological faculty are not just neighbors geographically, but that we are also working together. And one fruit of this cooperation is tonight's evening. I have the honor to introduce to you Keith Hart. Keith Hart is an anthropologist by training, he says on his homepage, and a self-taught economist. I think this is a little bit belittling his economic work. He lives in Paris. He has a home also in Durban in South Africa. At the moment, he is Centennial Professor of Economic Anthropology in the Department of International Development at the London School of Economics, and he's at the same time International Director of the Human Economy Program in the Center for the Advancement of Scholarship at the University of Pretoria. So you see the connections between Africa and Europe are very close. And he is also a professor of anthropology emeritus at Goldsmiths University in London. Keith started out studying classical languages and literature and went on to explore Atlantic society from the point of view of Africans in West Africa, North America, the Caribbean, Britain, France, and South Africa. He has taught in a dozen universities on both sides of the Atlantic, for the longest time in Cambridge, where he was the director of the African Studies Center. He has also worked as a consultant, publisher, and, as you can read on his homepage, as a gambler. What this might mean, you might want to ask him when the lecture is over and we have a glass of champagne outside. This might be a good opportunity to talk about his gambling experiences. Now, but his main interest is indeed the connection between anthropology and economy. So he has done work on the questions of building a human economy, on economic anthropology, on informal economy. This is a term which he has coined and which gained a lot of attention. African development, urbanization, migration, regional integration. These are some of the fields he has done research in. His recent book his recent books include Market and Society, The Great Transformation Today, 2009, The Human Economy, A Citizen's Guide, 2010, and he wrote an Economic Anthropology in 2011. Today we will hear his lecture on religion and economy. Keith Hart had a cold for a couple of days, so we said, why don't you better sit down and speak while you speak from a chair and not here standing all the time. We ask for your understanding. But before Keith Hart starts with his lecture, Wolfgang has another ritual to perform, and since Keith is an anthropologist, he certainly has understanding for that.
Okay, so you can hear all. I'm trained to this kind of audience in this room, so I can speak just louder. You can hear me? It's okay. I can do that. So it's a great pleasure to give you this. Thank you. That makes you the Hermann Otto Hirschfeld lecture, and it's signed not only by the dean, who happens to be never here, but it's signed also by Michael Burda. This is Michael Burda, the deputy director of the collaborative research center, and myself. Yeah. So congratulations to. So you can. But you have to stand here. We make another picture later. So, but you have to see who are the other, right? So that's it, right? You have to hold this, maybe. Yeah. So you have to stand here. Come on.
I have to stand.
Yeah. And he has to show all the other guys come here also, Wolf. Yeah. So don't cover any name here. Yeah, good. So you see, as I didn't lie, 2003 it started with Joel Horowitz from Northwestern, and it went through Steven Stigler, Chicago, Frank Diebold, and from Princeton, etc. And now it says here Keith Hart, 2015, correctly done, and Stephen Redding, Harald Uhlich, and so very famous economists. So thank you very much for coming. Yeah. And it will be forever in the dean's office, so that he doesn't. That's why he doesn't come, because he just sees your name there.
I'm going to pin this on you.
We're not going to use this?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
This is for the direct line to the camera.
Okay. So I start. Well, at first I thought I had no connection at all with Hermann Otto Hirschfeld, beyond the fact that Hart is the English for Hirsch. But actually I have a lot in common with him. It's something that I don't brag about too much, but I am, in fact, a statistician. I specialized in statistics when I started out as an anthropologist, and I had as one of my ambitions to be the first person to apply non-parametric statistical techniques and tests in Africa. It didn't work out quite so well, because the first test that I tried in my household in Accra, I said, tell me what you think of these questions. And they said, I can't answer questions like that. I mean, I'm just a small man. So anyway, the reason that I learned statistics was that by the time I went up to Cambridge, I was essentially a professional gambler. I've been betting on the horses since I was 12 years old. And I kind of invented an old 18th century French way of losing money called a martingale. Which is basically a kind of doubling up. But fortunately, I knew so much about the horses that my lousy statistical betting techniques were rescued by sheer empirical knowledge. It's also the case that my professor, a very famous, distinguished Cambridge professor of anthropology, was Meyer Fortes, and he worked with Carl Pearson in setting up that UCL statistical department, which was actually before, in the 30s, the first of its kind in the world. And Meyer Fortes developed some statistical techniques for generalizing about the life cycle under different conditions. So you won't see much of it here, but I mean, I have always been passionately interested in numbers, and I believe that numbers are essential for getting any concrete sense of large-scale, complex social entities like the world economy. So it turns out that my appointment was not as bizarre as it might first have looked. Now, religion belongs to a set of terms that also includes art and science. Science began as a form of knowledge opposed to religious mysticism. But today, religion has lost so much clout that science is now more often opposed to the arts than to religion. Now, if science may crudely be said to be the drive to know the world objectively, and if art is mainly a means of subjective self-expression, religion typically addresses both sides of the subject-object relationship by connecting what is intimate within each of us to something outside. And taking its Latin etymology, I mean, religion binds us to an external force by mobilizing something deeply internal to us. It stabilizes our meaningful interactions with the world and provides an anchor for our volatility. Now, Emil Durkheim's last book, The Elementary Forms of the Religious Life, which he published in 1912, in my view is, of all of the great books left to us by the founders of modern social theory, Marx, Weber, Durkheim, it is the one that has most potential to deliver insights and innovation that has not yet been mined in the way, let's say, that the Protestant ethic has. It is, moreover, his most neo-Kantian work. I mean, compared with his reductionist sociological approach of the 1890s, where consciousness is always collective, this study of religion conforms more closely to my focus on religion as a subject-object relationship. Durkheim divided experience into what we know and what we don't know. What we know well is everyday life, the mundane features of our routines. And we know it as individuals trapped in a sort of private busyness. But this life is subject to larger forces whose origin we don't know, to natural disasters, social revolutions, economic catastrophes, and above all, death. We desperately wish to influence these unknown causes of our fate, which we recognize as being both individual to ourselves and collective in their impact. At the very least, we would like to feel that they were less uncertain and to establish a meaningful connection with them. For Durkheim, religion was the organized attempt to bridge the gap between the known and the unknown in our lives, between a profane world of ordinary experience and a sacred, extraordinary world located outside that experience. What is ultimately unknown to us, says Durkheim, is how we belong to each other in society. And as a result, through ritual, we worship our unrealized powers of shared existence, that is, society, and we call it God. Society lies within each of us as well as outside, and it's this duality and their interaction that makes religion, I would argue, specific. The chaos of everyday life attains some stability to the degree that it is informed by beliefs representing the social facts of a shared collective existence. Rituals instill these collective representations in each of us. Now, I was involved in bringing to publication what I consider to be the second most important anthropological work on religion, which is Roy Rappaport's Ritual and Religion in the Making of Humanity, which I edited to publication after he died of cancer. And working on this book sharpened my appreciation of Durkheim's perspective, because Rappaport's book is an extended reflection on ritual as the ground where religion is made. His own definition of ritual starts from an emphasis on formality, invariance, and tradition. Now, the project of achieving our potential to be collectively human has barely begun, but I believe this century is the time in which we had better begin to do so effectively. Religion, according to Rappaport, is entailed in our origin as a species. According to him, it was invented at the same time as language. Religion, which is constantly being made and remade through ritual, is how we get in touch with the wholeness of things. And so the supreme object of religion is holiness, wholeness, health, all basically the same word. Now, gradually humanity has worked out ways of understanding our predicament on this planet as a human universal. There have been several, all of them so far failed. But in my usage, the human universal is not an idea, but it's the 7 billion of us trying to find a way of living together on this planet. And we, humanity, are the part of the biomass that thinks. And that means that we must use this intellectual capacity to assume responsibility for the stewardship of life as a whole. And in my view, religion is indispensable to this task of human planetary stewardship. Now, I'll move on to economy. In some cultural traditions, the word economy and economics are the same thing. For example, Schumpeter's great work on the history of economy is on the history of economic analysis. The French sociologist Michel Calon has published extensively on the idea that the economy is the product of economists. And in any case, French économie means both. And I wish English had that privilege, that we could actually move seamlessly from the thing that we're calling economy to the discipline of seeking to understand it. I mean, I should say that I've always thought of economy as my chief interest and objective. When I was even bolder than I am now, I used to say that it was my aim to win a Nobel Prize in economics and literature for the same book. But it is, in any case, I have no interest in an anthropology that provides economists with gimmicky externalities that they may or may not want to use as metaphors. So, on the one hand, we have the idea of the economy popularly as a social object, usually national. If you say, what is the economy, how is it doing, you mean the German economy, the British economy. But on the other hand, there is the idea of economy as analytical reason, around which the history of economic thought has been developed. Now, what I'm arguing is that economy is neither only subjective or only objective, but is, as I've already said, a dialectical relationship between subject and object. And there are very few institutional setups in our societies that carry the potential to realize that dialectical relationship. If you ask me what I think an economy is, I think it's something like the skin of an organism. If you think of the skin, the one you've got that you're in, skin keeps what's inside in and keeps what's outside out. But it also, unlike shells, for example, as a body covering, it allows for some limited interaction between inside and outside, which of course is its greatest and most important feature. Now, the two writers that I've learned most from in developing this idea of economic evolution were Marcel Mauss and Karl Polanyi. I actually think that Marcel Mauss's ideas are richer and more powerful in some ways than Polanyi's, but they do hold remarkably similar views on economic evolution. For reason of timing, I'll just mention Mauss's vision. Now, Mauss starts with the idea that the economy is local. People live in local societies, and these generally aspire to self-sufficiency. And they attach the organization of social rights and obligations to this presumptively self-sufficient social organization. So it's basically the idea society starts as mutual proximity. But the fact is there has never been a human society that was self-sufficient, materially or in any other way, which means that these societies have to go out of their limits and they have to devise ways of trading with foreigners in order to make good their local deficits. Now this trade, says Mose, and indeed Polanyi, can take many different forms. It can be archaic gift exchange. There are many different possibilities. But for him, the central function of this inside-out, moving outside, if you like, is always money. Whatever performs that function in any society, even if it doesn't look like what we think money is money. And the economic relations that it makes, of course, are markets. So that money and markets, in the most general sense, are thus human universals. It's impossible for human societies to do without them. For this reason, Mose wrote very strong polemics against the Bolshevik Revolution, partly because of the violence involved, but mainly the willful destruction of the potential of markets. So money and markets extend a society's reach, just as the demands of home society pull this expansion backwards. There is therefore a permanent tension between the internal and external dimensions of an economy, which of course takes different forms in other places. Now, all agrarian civilizations tried to keep markets and money in check, because power came from the landed property of an aristocratic military caste who feared that markets might undermine their control over society. Now, this dialectic of local and global economy existed long before we came to perceive the modern world in these terms. It's also the case that the underprivileged members of local society, slaves, serfs, women, young people, ethnic minorities, always had the possibility of finding freedom of movement through whatever limited form of markets they were exposed to. And indeed, all markets, however apparently local and limited, are in a sense world markets. There is no limit to the networks that could proliferate under these circumstances. And that's, of course, why local rulers fear them, because they represent an opportunity to undermine the inevitability of domestic institutions. Now, after the Industrial Revolution, the wage labor system led to an attempt to separate the spheres in which paid and unpaid work predominated. One of these is ideally objective and impersonal. It's specialized and calculated. The other is subjective and personal, diffuse, based on long-term interdependence. The first is a zone of infinite scope where things and increasingly human creativity are bought and sold for money, the market. The second is a protected sphere of domestic life where intimate personal relations hold sway, the home. The market is unbounded and in a sense unknowable, whereas the bounds of domestic life are known only too well. The result is a heightened sense of division between an outside world where our humanity feels swamped and the precarious zone of protected personality at home. This duality is the moral and practical foundation of capitalist society. Just as money is intrinsic to the home economy, personality remains intrinsic to the workplace. And that means that the cultural effort required to keep these two spheres of paid and unpaid labor separate is huge. There's a massive cultural effort needed, and it's never really succeeded. People have never truly succeeded in imposing an impersonal regime on work or a moneyless regime on the home. And this is why the members of capitalist societies believe that a money payment transforms social relations. Most people in the world don't believe this. They don't think that money has this power. But those of us who live in this highly pressurized, dualistic relation between home and market are more or less conditioned to imagine that if you pay for something, it transforms the nature of the relationship. I had a Ghanaian friend once who went to bed with an American woman he met at a party, and when he got up in the morning, he left her a banknote on the dressing table. What do you think I am, a prostitute? So we should actually recognize that this idea that money automatically changes everything is the rare and unusual approach to the subject. The current world economic crisis is not just a phase in the cycle of credit and debt. It's a profoundly significant moment in the history of economy, and specifically of money. The dominant economic form in the 20th century was something that I call national capitalism, which was the aim to control markets, money, and accumulation within a national territorial framework, and with the aim of equalizing the chances of citizens as far as possible. Now, the global money circuit massively outweighs national economies, and this all traces its recent history to the dollar being depegged from gold in 1971 and the invention of money derivatives in the following year. And it's very hard for us to realize how much the world of global money has changed in 40 years. In the middle 70s, almost all the money traded internationally paid for goods and services bought and sold internationally. Now, hardly any of the money traded internationally performs that function. In fact, a vast range of money instruments are exchanged for other money instruments, to the point that in 2013, foreign exchange, which is the largest single sector of money exchange, was turning over at the rate of $5.3 trillion a day. So it's hardly surprising. This is the problem we have. The global money circuit has become detached from politics and trade. It is on a scale that is essentially lawless in its scope. And the political means we have of trying to do something about it for the common good are almost exclusively national, with some modifications to that. So our dilemma today is that the economy is global and politics is mainly national. And that's what we have to figure out a way round. And for me, the only way round it is if we can extend our politics, the system of social rights, for example, to a more inclusive and ultimately global level. So the making of a more effective world society is the political problem of our day, and it manifests itself as a variety of various levels of the current economic crisis. So how is that going to be done? Now, I haven't yet given you, I gave you skin, which is, not the main. I mean, for me, economy must be both subjective and objective. And I believe that if you look at the history of the principal ways that economy has been constructed at different times in history, the principles of an economy have usually been conceived of as a specific strategy. It's basically an idea, not usually a very complicated idea, that must be discovered, articulated, and disseminated. Now, such an economy, to be useful, should be based on general principles that guide what people do. It is not just an ideology, nor is it a call for realism. The history of the word economy, as you know, is both long and unfinished. Any modern English dictionary reveals the residue of that history in the way we use terms like economy, economical, economize, referring as they do to order, management, and thrift in contexts ranging from household budgets to the world of markets and money. In origin, the Greek word economy privileged budgeting for domestic self-sufficiency. For the next 2,500 years, economy was everywhere domestic economy. And then in the 18th century, something else arose, calling itself political economy. It was political because not domestic. It was seeking order not in management routines in the home, but in the management of markets and money out there, as it were. Now, political economy had as its strategy privileging capitalist markets over military landlordism, granting power to profit over rent. And it's this idea of political economy that eventually became national capitalism, promoting seeking to equalize the chances of a citizen body. Now, I've been working for some years at the University of Pretoria on a research program into human economy. I won't be saying too much about it, but I mean, I'm trying to develop the idea of a human economy approach as one of the ways in which we could approach the general dilemma. So it's, I mean, there are obviously other forms of economy as strategy. National economy, which was developed by List in the 1840s, sought to increase the scope for home-based economy. Urban economy is another. There are not actually that many that are recognized by their name, but in each case they represent, I would argue, a strategy developed by a class in a conflictful historical situation. So perhaps human economy could be a way of envisaging the next stage, linking unique human personalities to humanity as a whole. This would stretch the inside-outside dialectic to its extremes. The social and technical conditions of our era, urbanization, fast transport, universal media, should underpin any inquiry into how the principles of human economy might be realized. A human economy approach does not assume that people know best, although they usually know their own interests better than those who presume to speak to them. Intuitively, a human economy puts people back into the driving seat. It is, in other words, a form of small-scale humanism. But small-scale humanism is not enough. It's not enough just to back grassroots popular initiatives involving real people doing what they know best. In fact, this kind of humanism has to be selectively connected to the power of large bureaucracies. People want to make some meaningful connection between themselves as subjects and society as an object. And it helps that money, as well as being a means of separating public and domestic life, was always the main bridge between the two. Today, it is the source of our vulnerability in society and the practical symbol allowing each of us to make an impersonal world meaningful. That is why money must be central to any attempt to humanize society. If money has indeed separated economic spheres and fragmented human experience, it can also join together what it has divided. So, if you have some money, there is almost no limit to what you can imagine doing with it. I mean, just having the money gives you a sense of infinite possibility. But as soon as you buy something, that act of payment lends concrete finality to your choice. And so, to my mind, what is essential about money is its ability to mediate the extremes of our experience between the most inclusive forms of social imagination and the most specific and concrete ways in which we organize our lives. So, for me, money, the significance of money lies in the synthesis that it promotes of impersonal abstraction and personal meaning, objectification and subjectivity, analytical reason and synthetic narrative. Its social power comes from the fluency of its mediation between infinite potential and finite determination. We need to understand better how to build the infrastructures of collective existence, money among them. How do meanings come to be shared and memory to transcend the minutiae of personal experience? Property must endure in order to be property, and that depends on memory. Money thus expands the capacity of individuals to stabilize their own personal identity by holding something durable that embodies the desires and wealth of all the other members of society. I think I'd better move to some conclusions. Is that right?
We'll have some discussion. Those are the questions. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I want to end with trying to bring money and religion, economy and religion together. The word belief in Middle English meant originally something held dear. You believe something that you hold dear, which is to say that exchanges involving money entail at some level a vision of humanity bound together by mutual love. This doesn't really help my argument, but I can't resist giving you this quote from a remarkable essay by Karl Marx of 1844 called The Power of Money. He says, "If you love without evoking love in return, If you are not able, by the manifestation of yourself as a loving person, to make yourself a beloved person, then your love is impotent and a misfortune. Okay, as I said, it doesn't really help my argument, but it's, there was a young Marx once. Now, religion has long played a major role in economy. Indeed, until recently, political rulers took their guidance from religious advisors. The switch from religion to social science in the late 19th century was, in my view, a huge mistake, and the experiment has demonstrably failed. I've suggested here that there is an elective affinity between religion and economy. The movement of both is from the known to the unknown and back again. The intellectual paradigm for both is neo-Kantian. Humanity's problems come from our interdependence having outweighed grossly our political and legal grasp. We need to find more effective ways of realizing our common humanity. Now this, I would argue, is a religious project, not a scientific one. Social science focuses our attention on myriad divisions, gender, class, nation. But how does each of us relate to the whole? This, to my mind, is the ultimate question of religion. On the one hand, each of us feels like a puny self, and on the other, lost in a vast, unknowable universe that could come crashing down around our ears at any time, and in any case will when you die, as everyone must. So the question is, how can we bridge the gap between this small and vulnerable self and the idea of an unknowable universe to which we are subject? Now, traditionally, religion performed this task, and as long as those governing society acknowledged its role, there was a tangible bridge between men of power and the masses. For over a century now, however, this link has been broken in the societies that still most influence world history. Rather, science presumptively rules, and social science has even displaced the humanities. It is worth recalling, by the way, the method of the humanities, which is we seek truth of a potentially universal significance through the exercise of personal judgment in particular cases backed by scholarship and rigorous thought. Great literature was always the main vehicle for achieving this link, but it's also built into the traditions of history, law, philosophy, and, let it be acknowledged, ethnography. There is a common method to all this which exceeds the limits of academic inquiry. We need to scale the world down and scale the self up so that they can meet somewhere with the prospect of making a meaningful connection. The classic means to do this was prayer. Religion is, amongst many other things, an attempt to maintain a binding link between something deeply personal and subjective inside each of us and the impersonal world out there that we inhabit. I can talk to God privately or publicly. So the main way we attempted to reconfigure our relationship to the world in the last 2 centuries has been, for at least societies such as Europe's, to move away from this humanism, if you like, I would argue that what performs this role for us is the consumption of fiction. That is, novels, plays, movies. And here, when we engage with fiction, the world is reduced in scale to a stage, a paperback, or a screen, allowing the reader or the audience to enter into this world, this restricted world, on any subjective terms that we wish. So in other words, while you're reading War and Peace, you get to say, well, would I rather be Pierre or André? Well, actually, Tolstoy was both at different ages. But I would argue that our greatest social thinkers are Sophocles, Shakespeare, and Goethe, precisely because their medium bridged the gap between human personality and an impersonal world most effectively. But many modern novelists and movie makers are not far behind. Should I stop there? I can go on a bit. Okay. All right. Global communications today are in transit between the age of the mass media and the possibilities for expressing ideas large and small through the new universal media afforded by the internet and mobile phones. The main event of the 20th century was the anti-colonial revolution, when people forced into a world society by European imperialism in the 19th century sought to establish their own independent relationship to it. And this process was facilitated, you might say, by World War. Now, one of my lines is I like to study the great anti-colonial intellectuals of the mid-20th century, and of these, the one that I gain most from reading is Mohandas Gandhi. And I'll finish just by showing how Gandhi developed a personal method which he tried to disseminate amongst his followers, which I hope combines religion and economy in some of the ways that I've hinted at today. The main book on Gandhi's economic thought, my view is that he's a cross between a Victorian romantic and a Buddhist economist, and this is why the Hindus killed him, because he really didn't understand the majority of Indian society at all. So I said to a friend of mine who was a specialist in Burmese Buddhism, I said, I think Gandhi was a Buddhist economist. He says, you got any evidence for that? And I said, no. So then he sent me a book by an Indian economist called Gupta, called Gandhi's Economic Thought. And on the first page it said, Gandhi was the greatest Indian economist since the Buddha. Anyway, Gandhi held that the purpose of a civilization is to enable its members whereas the modern state disables its citizens, making us patients, students, taxpayers, and prisoners. Now, his anthropology, his philosophical humanism, held that we are all unique personalities who participate together in our common humanity. The question is, how do we span that gap? We do so normally by erecting a vast panoply of social divisions of race, class, nationality, religion, gender, time, and place, and conceive of our relationship between these two poles as somehow being mediated by these. But my view is that emphasizing these intermediate divisions makes it almost impossible for us to connect each of us to the sense of belonging to a humanity that has unity and coherence. I'll finish with two examples of how he applied his method. When he went to London to study the law, he couldn't find anything he wanted to eat. He was a vegetarian. So he joined the Vegetarian Society, got himself on the committee, and 2 years later when he left, there were 20 vegetarian restaurants in London. The other one was his politics was very much concerned with allowing one's sense of self to rise to and influence important collective political events. In the mid-1920s, he went on, there was a huge strike in a big industrial city, Ahmedabad. Gandhi, after a few days of this strike, made his way to Ahmedabad and then sat down on a street corner, just sat on the street corner and, I don't know, spun some homespun, I suppose. Within a few days, the whole strike hinged on him. Now, what he's trying to say is that our political systems